We are on the frontiers of a new science. We're all starting to awaken to truths about who we are and where we're going. Open yourself to new knowledge about the power of spiritual energy and consciousness. Journey with Donna Smith-Moncrieffe as she takes you through the world of mediumship, energy healing, out-of-body experiences, past life regression, and all topics that demonstrate evidence of the true nature of our reality.
Welcome to On the Frontiers of a New Science. I am Donna Smith-Moncrieffe, and on today's show we have Dr. Craig Hogan, teacher and author of several books related to the afterlife. Dr. Hogan is well known for his teaching and writing about guided afterlife communications. Today we have the pleasure of further unpacking the concept of instrumental transcommunication. Sit back and listen to how discarnate souls without a physical body use energy through videos, radio, and other technologies to communicate with us from the spirit world. Welcome, Craig, and how are you doing today?
Hi, Donna. I'm doing fine. I'm very excited to be here. I love talking about the subject because there's so much going on now.
Okay, well, we're going to learn from your expertise. And for our listeners, of course, some of the listeners on our program are very new to issues related to the afterlife. So perhaps you could start us off by just explaining what is instrumental transcommunication and how did you get involved with it?
Instrumental transcommunication means that those on the other side of life, on the next plane of life, use any instrument, an electronic instrument, to communicate with us. And that can be television. They will show their faces on television. It can be on a recorder. It can be on a video camera. It can be on the television program can be playing, and suddenly a face comes on. So any instrumental transcommunication device, they will come on, and at times, of course, they come on spontaneously. But we're now working on having them come through when we want to have a dialogue with them. So that's the effort that's going on now, and we're being very successful with it. We're getting both images and voices through instrumental transcommunication, and they have been validated by the people who know the people and sometimes their relatives with whom they communicate through the instrumental transcommunication. So it's become a very exciting time.
Well, absolutely, because you can imagine if we have some way or tool of communicating with those from the other side, outside of using a medium. Of course, this is extremely interesting. So let's step back now that we understand the concept a little better. Before we elaborate on each a little more, tell us how you actually got involved in this.
Well, I actually had started off finding out more and more about psychic activities because I found out that I have some psychic abilities. And I realized that there was much more to life than just what we see. And as I got into the psychic abilities, I learned that the psychic abilities continue after a person leaves the earth plane. And they then go on to the next plane of life, and they're alive there. And so I wanted to find out more about that, and I wanted to help other people to find out about it. And so I became involved in it, started working with people like Roberta Grimes in the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies, and then joined the Academy and now have been organizing the conferences with Roberta in which we bring together people to learn about the afterlife and what we know about afterlife communication. And so now I've dedicated my life to helping people to learn how to communicate, and the process is, part of that process is that we are finding new ways of communicating, and as we find new ways, then we get them out to people as fast as we can. We've now identified 16 methods that are successful. The instrumental transcommunication are the most exciting because of the fact that here you have something you can listen to. You know, the person's actually coming through, or you can see their image. And so we're really focusing on that right now.
Okay, so let's talk about one in particular. So you mentioned several. So you started off by telling us, of course, there's the electric voice phenomena, which is with the radio, and you talked about, we know that there's some work being done with videos. Can you take us through one, for example, maybe explain a little bit of the technique, who is coming? Obviously, perhaps it's those who are grieving and want to actually get some kind of physical evidence. Can you take us through one that you find to be quite evidential?
Yeah, the most exciting work right now, I think, is being done by Sonia Rinaldi in Brazil, and we are now duplicating her effort in the United States. And what Sonia began doing was recording voices on a PC. So what she would do is she would play sounds that were cut-up voices. In other words, they were not any single word. They were just pieces of words. And she would play the sounds, and as she played them, then she would record the sounds and ask questions. And so the questions would go on the recorder along with the sounds. And she discovered that she can have people from the other side come through. So as she developed this ability, she started having parents come in, and they would dialogue with their children. They would ask the children questions, and the recordings would come out with the children speaking back to the parents. She, in 1 month, has done 163.
Let's look at an example of electronic voice phenomena. The following sample clips illustrate how a mother who comes in to see Sonia Rinaldi asks questions in hopes that her daughter Amanda would respond. Amanda, who passed into the spirit world at the age of 3 for unknown reasons, speaks to her. The following is the recording in Portuguese. See the text for the English translation.
They're very successful and very evidential because of the fact that the parents are dialoguing with their own children. So I think that's the most exciting one, and we now are replicating that. We're doing it here. There is in Brazil what they called the Brazilian station on the other side, and that was teams on the other side working to bring through these messages. They could only do it in Portuguese, though. That's Brazil. And so what's happened is that when they realized that we wanted to do it, then a team on the other side started working with us, and now they're establishing a North American station, and we're getting these voices in English. And we now are getting single words and phrases, and they are repeating them as we say or we ask a question. And so what we're doing is working towards getting them in full sentences and having dialogues with them on the other side, but it's being very successful.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and I find that very intriguing what you just said in terms of when you're talking about the other side. I mean, it helps our listeners understand that we are co-collaborating with those discarnates and our loved ones, spirit teams, whatever we want to call them, when they know that you're interested in, for example, further examining a subject, they form a team, and it could be in English. I mean, if they realize that there's some other kind of barrier. Don't you find that amazing?
It is amazing, and it's humbling. And so here they are coming through, and we're sitting there in the room that we have devoted to it, and we're having a dialogue with these people who are on the other side, and they say that they are from quite a distance away, and what they mean is not in physical distance, but in the vibration. And so it really is humbling to have them dialogue with us, to be able to say words or ask a question, and they come back with the answers in direct response to us.
Yeah, now, before we get now to look at another piece of the technology, Craig, what I wanted to just add for our listeners is I when I first initially heard about instrumental transcommunication, the first thing that went through my mind is it possible that these are random sounds, right, that are heard on the radio, and perhaps, because, you know, we can pick up signals throughout the world on different frequencies. And one of the things we can share with our listeners is that Alexander McCrae did an experiment, and he spent he was spending more than 40 years researching electric voice phenomena, and he had a background in engineering, and he was able to shield his laboratory to ensure that it could not pick up external signals. And he was able to do electric voice phenomena and prove that even with a barriered sound room, information was still coming through. And I think it's important for our listeners to sort of, reduce any doubt that if there are no external signals coming, and people are still getting information through a radio or some kind of electronic technology, that is indeed evidence that this is coming from somewhere else. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, and that experiment is done with a Faraday cage, which is shielded from all electromagnetism, so no signals can come through from a radio station. And the voices still came through. And Konstantin Rodova, who was a Latvian researcher in Transcommunication, had done his work, and when he crossed over to the other side, then he started communicating back with us. And there were two audio engineering firms in England, Pi Records and Belling & Lee, who replicated the experiments that were being done under controlled conditions and had Rodova come through, and he did communicate with them, and they stringently controlled them, but the voices still came through, and so it proved that the fact that it was Rodova from the other side who was doing the communication. So there are studies that have been done, and we're going to be doing many more of them now that we're successful in being able to get through to the other side through this instrumental transcommunication.
Okay. So now that you've shared, for example, that very important piece of evidence, can you tell us, for example, maybe provide a scenario for you where you were working with someone, and what kind of information and what kind of clarity, and I'll just give a little more context to that. Sometimes when I've heard or reviewed some excerpts of this, that some of the challenges have been that the information is not always clear. It's open to interpretation sometimes. Perhaps could you give us an example that for you was either very clear and either very meaningful for a parent in terms of identification of that particular person from the spirit world?
In one instance, in Sonia Rinaldi's work, she did have somebody come through in English, and it was for a person in preparation for the conference that we had in 2014, and the person came through when they wanted to have a connection between the parent and then the child on the other side, and the child came through with a very clear statement that sounded like somebody was standing in front of a microphone, and she said, "Mommy, I can talk." And that began the dialogue. And also my mother has come through. So Sonia has had her come through, and I've had her come through in our efforts here. And it's distinctly my mother. The first time Sonia asked her if she had any words to say to me, and she said in a very distinct voice that was like she was standing in front of a microphone, "We're ready now to talk." And what that meant was that they are starting to establish the North American station. And so she did also come through for us here in the United States when we had attempted to contact her. And my question for her that was on the recording was, "Mom, are you around so that we can talk to you?" And she said, "I'm around." And it was very distinctive. And then we've had more dialogues of that kind, but we do know that these what we get are called Class A. They're perfectly recorded voices. They sound like they're standing in front of a microphone. There's nothing that has to be interpreted about them, and you would not think that they were EVPs if you listen to them because they sound just like somebody was speaking to you in the same room. In fact, that's one of the things that happens when we're doing the recordings, and we listen to them through headsets afterwards. And there are times when a voice will come through like that, and it sounds like they're standing next to us. So it's very high quality.
That's incredible. Now, when you're talking about the voice and the way it sounds, for our listeners, can you help us establish, have you been finding, for example, that the voice sounds similar to what they were in the physical world? And let me qualify that just a bit more. What it immediately starts to help make me think of, for example, the work that we're all doing, for example, in physical mediumship, whereby sometimes when the materialized entity comes back through the ectoplasm into the physical world, I have noticed in my own research that the voice is not necessarily the same as it was, and I've been finding that perhaps sometimes it is that they don't actually recall how they sounded, or perhaps they're putting on a voice that they want to use. Or I just wonder what you can share with us from the EVP perspective in terms of the similarity of the voice.
Yeah, and in Leslie Flint's seances, and we have recordings, thousands of them, of his seances in direct voice, and the voices came through, and he had Rudolph Valentino come through. And Valentino was very successful in silent films, but when the talkies came and there were voices on the films, he was not successful because he had a very high-pitched voice. But when he came through in Leslie Flint's seances and it was recorded, he came through with a masculine voice. And as you say, it's because he had chosen that. He didn't want the high-pitched voice. What we have to understand about our recordings of the people on the other side is that they're not speaking. There are no sound waves. It's not coming into a vibration instrument like a speaker. And it is, in fact, coming from them as they impress their thoughts, impress what they would like it to sound like onto the recorder. So it goes directly onto the recorder, and there's no voice there. And as a result of that, they are, in fact, projecting what it is that they believe they sounded like or what they would like to sound like, but usually it's what they believe they sounded like. Same is true of images. When we see an image of them in guided afterlife connections or on a video camera, the image that we see is what they're projecting. It isn't of them. We're actually not seeing them. We're seeing the image they're projecting. But in the case of the EVP and instrumental transcommunication, we are getting the voices from them, and we can tell by the contents, by the quality, and sometimes by the pace, by the timbre of the voice, that it is in fact this person whom we know who is now on the next plane of life.
Right. Now, so you've just shared with us some fascinating pieces, more than one, and I'd like to just take us back to one in particular, which is a good segue into sort of the discussion of the videos. Because I know you started talking about Sonia Rinaldi and the work that she shared at the conference last year. She did a lot of that. She talked about the images that were coming through on the video. Can you take us through, for example, that particular phenomena and how that actually has confirmed, for example, what you were talking about in terms of the image and related to survival of consciousness? Can you share with us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and what she does, what Sonia does when she's capturing the images is she has a video camera set up, and she then videos something in which the light is changing. It can be bubble wrap, or it can be something on the wall in which the light is changing that because you move it back and forth. But as the light changes, then they are able to transform the light into whatever the image is that they're projecting. And so then as the video camera runs, that light changes. There is nothing there that would make that into an image except that they manipulate it. Then the image then comes onto the camera, and the person who is doing the experimentation has to go through and look at every frame of the camera, because the images sometimes will come in single frame, and these are running at 40 frames a second. And so that means that we have to go through and look at every frame to be able to see them, and suddenly within a frame then you'll see an image. And in other circumstances, for instance on a television, people have been able to photograph the spirit because the person stays on the television long enough. In fact, Jurgensen, who was an instrumental transcommunication pioneer, after he had passed into the next plane of life, just at the point of his funeral, they photographed images of his energy on television. So you could actually see the face of this Jurgensen on the television, and they have photographs of it now.
That's pretty incredible. And I want to ask you, just because I'm already trying to project what some of our listeners are wondering, especially people who are trying to gain a better understanding of what we mean by spirit and discarnates. When we say that they're projecting their image, I think for some people, and I've heard even researchers talk about this, that this is why, for example, this is not necessarily evidence of survival of consciousness because it's not them exactly. I don't necessarily believe that point of view, but I wonder if we could talk about that a bit. You talked about they were projecting their impressing energy because, of course, that's what we are. We're all vibrational frequencies. Could you address that point that some
sure.
people are raising about that?
Sure, and what they're doing is they are on their plane, on their vibrational plane, they're living in the same plane that we are. This plane that we're living on is a spiritual plane. The earth plane is a spiritual plane. And so this plane feels to us very solid. We can touch things and we can move things around. And their plane is just as solid. So when they're living on their plane, they're living on a plane just like this one. So if you want to know what a spiritual plane looks like, you just look around you right now, and that's what it looks like.
Exactly.
But when they're coming back and they're trying to communicate with our plane, they're on a different vibration. So they can't come into it as the physical that they are in that other plane. What they have to do is to project from where they are into our plane. And as they project into the earth plane, then they have to use their thoughts, their conceptions, because it's a physical law. It's a law of physics that physics just doesn't understand yet. But the law of physics is that when they communicate from one plane to another plane, they can communicate by thought and simply project the image that they want to project into our plane, and then we can see whatever the image is that they project, but we can't look into their plane. They are able to look into ours, but we can't look into theirs. And the reason we're not able to look into theirs is because we're in Earth School, and we have to stay with our lessons in Earth School, and we can't then start to delve into living in other planes. We've got things to do here. But that's the reason that they project their image, because of the fact that they are just not on this vibration right now. They have to project into the vibration.
Okay. Now, so let's talk a little bit, because one of the things that I was fascinated with was the work with the video, where you may recall the example that Sonia Rinaldi shared with us last year, the two sons, unfortunately, that had passed into the spirit world, and she was able to show the progression of how they would have looked today. And now let's take that example and apply it to what you were just sharing with us in relation to them impressing their image, because I imagine that they were trying to show the mother, who was also there at the conference, how they actually looked in this particular time period. I wonder if you want to address that for us.
Yeah, and what they actually did was, it was in a series of these frames. They showed themselves at different ages, starting with the age in which they passed through the tragedy, and then maturing so that it showed them as the young men that they would be if they were on the earth plane. Because we know that the children on the next plane of life will mature and will grow, and they'll become more the person they would have been had they been on the earth plane as they grow until they reach maturity, but they don't become old. By the same token, those who pass and they are old will come back to the person who they were in their prime, so they would be in their late 20s, perhaps early 30s. So then her boys then they were showing, they intended to show, and when I say they, it's not just the boys themselves. There are teams on the other side who are helping out with this. So they would be helping the boys to project those images onto what Sonia was filming. And then when they were projected onto them, they showed what they looked like as the children who had passed, and then as they matured, what they look like now as the older children.
Yeah, I mean, that was fascinating, and that was that sort of leads me into our next question about how do you think now with this technology it's contributed to positive changes in individuals' lives. I mean, you touched on it earlier as we were talking. Somebody being able to see the image of their past loved one. I mean, what are some of the feelings and the thoughts? How beneficial is that for healing?
And it is very beneficial when the people experience, especially Sonia Rinaldi's work, when they experience this connection with their child on the other side, then they realize that they have the answer to their question, how is my child, where is my child? And they make this connection, and it's life-changing for them. They then change in their attitude towards the passing, towards the transition, towards their grief about where their child is. They understand where they are. And so it's life-changing for those who engage in this. And our goal now is to make this so refined that we can do this at will and then disseminate it. So we want people to be able to do it, and we are teaching other people how to do this so that they can do it on their own and be part of this research that we're doing. But it's life-changing for the parents, and it will be life-changing for others who engage in this as we are able to share it with more and more people.
Yes, and I want to just compliment what you were sharing in terms of the healing, and just for our listeners, one of the amazing things I learned from Sonia Rinaldi was that it's almost like she was chosen to do this work, and for our listeners, she does not accept any money for the work that she's doing. This has all been work that she does to contribute to those who need healing, and really to science. And I was just so lucky to get that personal information from her actually on the way back from the conference, because, and I think our listeners need to understand that a lot of the work that's being done and the research that you're doing and all of the work that we're trying to do to gather a better understanding of consciousness and how the nature of reality really is all done really through the heart, is what we're putting out there. And then it's sort of reflected back through spirit, as you talked about, teams forming to further collaborate with us to make this happen. This isn't for any other purpose. It's not a materialistic motive. And I think that's so important. It is
important, and that's the work that we're doing. We do not benefit from this work at all. Don't charge for anything that we do. We are willing to do whatever it takes, and so what we're doing is we're doing our part on this side of life, because we're working with the team on the other side. We're part of a team, and so we are servants. We are working with the people on the other side, and we will do whatever is necessary. And so we're not concerned about money and those sorts of things, and we are going to be giving this to humanity freely.
Yeah, no, I love that. Now, what I find interesting about this, and this has always been my concern, so for example, for those listening, you may have been introduced first, unfortunately, to instrumental communication through the movie White Noise. Do you remember that, Craig, the movie? That, and this was somewhat unfortunate. In one way, it's positive when Hollywood shares this phenomena, because on the one hand, it is the truth. I mean, they were demonstrating a form of what we're talking about, but unfortunately, it did mislead people, because of course the movie turned into sort of this is a negative entity, and the negative entity had interactions with people on the earth plane. I want to address that point. Are there any concerns about this technique? I can recall somebody was asking a question, for example, the use of Audacity, which is a tool that's used software that's used with electric voice phenomena, and someone raised the concern, if I leave it on, I haven't meditated properly, could I be attracting those spirits that are not necessarily welcome? I wonder if you could address this, because it's similar to our concerns with any kind of work we do when we interact with the spiritual world. We do need to protect ourselves. I wonder if you could talk about that aspect.
Yeah, it's very much like we're walking through a city, and we know that there are some places you don't walk through. And those on the other side is like that we're entering a whole realm. We're entering their city. And if we open ourselves up, and it's like walking through the worst part of a city, and you can have all kinds of bad things happen to you. But what we have to do is, it isn't a hobby. It isn't something that's done for entertainment. This is an effort. It's a sacred effort. We're attempting to communicate with those who are on the next planes of life. And so we have to have a higher spiritual level. The Ghostbusters, the people who go out to haunted houses and try to provoke the entities there, they're asking for problems. And what will happen is, if they're having a contact with someone, an entity on the other side, and that entity is an earthbound entity who might cause some problems, then if they are doing it as a hobby, they're at a lower spiritual level, then that person can go home with them. So that is possible to happen. But if we're on a higher spiritual level, as we are when we do our work, as we are when we have parents come in and they communicate with their children on a higher spiritual level. There never are any earthbounds. There never are any negative entities that enter into that higher spiritual level, and so we are shielded from that.
And that's really good to know, and I think it's so important that we always share that with our listeners so they won't be discouraged about interacting and exploring the phenomena we're talking about. I want to thank you, Dr. Hogan, for sharing so much information about instrumental transcommunication. So exciting what we have moving forward. I also want to share with our listeners that we're going to provide links to Dr. Hogan's site and the books. And most important, I wanted to bring your attention to an upcoming conference that Dr. Hogan and Roberta Grimes are putting on. It's called the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies, September 25th to 27th in Scottsdale, Arizona. Going to be very exciting. I went to the conference last year and met a number of wonderful people and really learned some state-of-the-art information, which got me very excited and inspired. And so I hope that you will be there. They'll also be featuring David Thompson, who I studied very closely in Sarasota in 2014, and I can guarantee you that is going to be a life-transforming experience if you're able to participate in that physical mediumship seance. I am Donna Smith-Moncrieffe, and we have been talking with Dr. Craig Hogan about new techniques that further demonstrate the existing capabilities for communicating interdimensionally. As we begin to identify the power of consciousness and explore inner power, we will create realities that we all dream about. Through increased resuscitation techniques and near-death experiences, we can learn more about what really happens after the demise of the physical body.
Join us each week as Donna Smith-Moncrieffe explores topics related to spiritual energy and consciousness. Collaborating with other experts, they will share evidence and ideas for you to integrate consciousness.